Good morning and welcome to this Euractiv debate on chemical risk management. What is the role of the essential use concept under REACH authorisation and restriction? Our programme today is supported by the Nickel Institute. I'm Brian Maguire. If you want to join us on social media today, hashtag EA Debates, our social media team will respond there and amplify the message. And if you want to send us questions today, log into Slido, or you can scan there on the screen, and the hashtag is EUC, hashtag EUC. Send us your questions there. We'll put those to the panel during the course of the discussion. We won't wait till the very end. We're going to use your questions through the course of the discussion, so you can send those right now and we'll bring them to the panel very soon. So our programme today reflects that on October 2020, the European Commission adopted its chemical strategy for sustainability. The CSS is part of the EU's zero pollution ambition, a key commitment of the European Green Deal. The EU's chemical strategy aims to better protect citizens and the environment and boost innovation for safe and sustainable chemicals. To work towards the objectives of the EU's chemical strategy, a reform of REACH was also announced. With respect to risk management, the Commission proposed to ban the most harmful chemicals, namely chemical substances meeting specific hazards criteria in consumer products, allowing those chemicals only where the use is considered essential. This is referred to as this essential use concept. Joining us to discuss the chemical strategy for sustainability and the definition and application of the essential use concept, we have with us Otto Lehner. He's the Senior Expert at the REACH Unit, DG GROW at the European Commission. Tatiana Santos, Head of Chemicals Policy at the European Environmental Bureau. Marko Sosnick, he's Advisor to the Secretary General on Chemicals Policy at the SME United and Senior Advisor on Chemical Policy at the Austrian Economic Chamber. And we also have Martina Bianchini. She's President of the International Fragrance Association. Thank you for joining us and taking the time to be with us this morning. I'm going to ask each of our panelists just to kick off with about 60 seconds of an introduction on their key message for today. Otto, can I start with you? 60 seconds.
Yeah, well, the essential use concept can help us, in particular, to deal faster with clear cases where I think we are dealing with political priorities or negative priorities. It can also help us to support decisions on less clear cases, but there I think the problem is mainly that we should avoid getting lost in detail, and it is very important that we also provide clear pathways for substitution for industry to avoid uncertainties. So I think that's roughly and very briefly where I see the value added of the essential use concept.
We were having this. Can you hear us okay? Are you able to go ahead? Go ahead, thank you. 60 seconds, Tatiana.
Yes, I wanted to also raise the issue on why essential use concept. This was brought forward by the chemical strategy to help phase out the most harmful chemicals and allow systematic decision making. So in our view, this is the right approach to increase the protection of people and the environment, and also to speed up the phasing out of the most harmful chemicals. Perhaps just to break the ice, saying that let's not mix apples and oranges when it comes to the essential use. It's not about the importance or how convenient specific chemicals or products are, but about when the society can accept very hazardous chemicals in everyday products. So the ban is for the most harmful chemicals in products, except when they are truly necessary for health, critical for society, and there are no safer alternatives.
Thank you, Tatiana. Marko, 60 seconds.
Thanks you. And good morning to everyone. Well, basically, what we are the most worried about the essential use discussion. I would like to continue where Tatiana has stopped. We are not talking according to what the Commission has published, the study on the essential uses. We are actually talking about essential can be only something that is being used for the treatment of severe health conditions and for the basic functioning of society, like water, food, and shelter. This is basically what's our starting point for that discussion that's in the study on the essential use concept. And considering that we are quite a well-developed, highly industrialized society, this is relatively low level. And I think we really have to fine-tune that, because health, we really risk to lose very important tools. Chemicals are tools. We think that they can be used safely. They have contributed to great technical achievements. We live beyond 80 years of age. We have a child mortality that is at absolute historical low. That's also because we have done a good job within industry. We, for example, have non-invasive surgery, although PFAS, highly controversial chemicals, are using in that product. However, I'm not saying that we should keep everything as it is. I think that over the last decades, a lot of things have improved. Safety of chemicals has improved. I think that substitution plays a very important role in the modern chemicals management, and we should continuously improve risk management for chemicals. But finally, I think that chemicals in the end are tools that I think as a chemist, and we can use most of them safely. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Martina, over to you, 60 seconds.
Yes, in the fragrance industry, our vision also is that fragrance is a safe and essential part of life. And we work with policymakers for 50 years. And we have, in addition to working on regulatory matters, we have a safe use program in place, a product stewardship program for the fragrance industry that ensures good risk management. I fully agree that the most harmful chemicals have to be substituted over time. But the question is, how harmful, or is hazard really harm? And we will probably come to that later. So when we look at the essential use concept from the perspective of a practitioner and an industry which uses a lot of mixtures, including natural ingredients, which contain hazardous components, then to us, this essentiality concept is very, very complex. And we also believe that it is not yet mature enough for wide-scale legislation across different policy areas, like it is pronounced and spelled out in the CSS.
Thank you, Martina.
So we are worried and we're concerned about the concept. There are certainly good things in it, but when the rubber meets the road and you look how is it going to impact your business, then you see a lot of hurdles that still need to be clarified.
Let me bring this back to Otto then. Otto, if you can scope out for us with a little bit of detail about what essential use means and how this process is likely to develop in terms of being refined, as Marco said. Okay. Are you still muted, Marco? Otto? Okay, can you unmute? Let's see. Do we have sound? Okay, you need to keep trying. If you can try and unmute again, Otto. Not working. Okay, we'll come back to you just a second then. Okay, Marco. Marco, the same kind of approach. How do you, from your perspective, how do you see essential use being defined, and how do you see this process unfolding as well as it is more fully understood, Marco?
No, as I said before, I think what we have so far on the plate, so basically in the essential use study, which is basically commissioned by the European Commission, this is very prescriptive. So basically, we are talking about severe health conditions and basic functioning of society. So basically, it's not even clear what's a severe health condition, for whom is something severe, what's the basic functioning society. This is very subjective. And in general, I think that essentiality is a very subjective thing, where you have very difficult elements going in, like culture, religion, time, situation you're in. I think these are the most four complex parameters, which in the end somebody will have to define, where you will need a group, where you will need a decision-making process, which in the end, I think won't be easier and won't be less bureaucratic than what we have now in the REACH authorization, if this is not handled with care and with a pragmatic approach.
The objective is to give some kind of certainty to business so they can invest, they know what they're dealing with, the regulatory process is faster. You don't think that's going to be the outcome of this process, Marco?
We are worried. Personally, I'm worried that it won't be. Because, look, what is essential for me is this necessarily essential for you? And I'm coming from a point where I belong to a very small language group, and we had a lot of fights about is our language essential or not over decades. And basically, if you looked to the majority population, for a very long time, this wasn't essential for no one, but we had to fight for it. So basically, that's the problem. It can be essential for me, but it's not necessarily essential for you.
Okay.
And then in the end, who decides? And where is minority protection in that sense? Cultural protection, religious protection.
Okay.
And we have examples.
I'm going to bring back to Otto. Sound is kind of essential for this as well. I think we've got Otto working again. Otto, just to recap on this again. So essential use concept, what does this look like in terms of its current definition? Where are we going to go down the road as this evolves?
I hope you can hear me now. Okay, perfect. So essential use concept consists of two criteria. One is political, and that's the question, is a use critical for society or is it necessary for health and safety? So this brings in an element that we didn't have before. And the second criterion is the absence of alternatives. That's something that we've been working in REACH for a long time. So both criteria go together. I think the criticality allows us to quicker say, okay, this is really a use that we need for society, so we can act faster in giving derogations. But also on the other side, when we realize that something is not really needed for society, we are not going to run any risk. So we tell people beforehand, so this is not a use where you can apply for a derogation from a restriction or from an authorization.
I understand that is this the precautionary principle in practice, or is this something more rigid?
Of course, the precautionary principle plays a role. That means if there is nothing that really is at stake for society, it's better not to run a risk in the first place. So this is what is meant there. Of course, there are a lot of cases which are more in between. That is going to be more tricky. That's where we're discussing a lot about how to organize those cases. But at least for the clear cases, it really allows us to be faster.
Okay, Otto, just a couple more quick questions on this, and then we'll go to the other panelists as well, and just to scope this out. So when I hear political, I hear 27 member states in a room going, well, you can ban it, but we need it. And phosphates, for example. So the idea that we can agree a technical term for some of these products because we have 27 different industries. Is a single market approach going to work in this, or are we looking at a long-term, and by long-term I mean 20 years or more, of a process to really establish what essential use looks like? And we can talk about the Montreal principles, Montreal Protocol, for example, which was from 1989 to 2019, I think that was the scope of time they used. How is this going to play out in terms of politics and timeline? Otto?
Well, it's not a concept for the long term. It's something that really can apply as soon as we have the revised REACH regulation in place. Maybe it's easiest if I just try to illustrate. For example, if you look at PFAS uses, if we have uses to produce hydrogen, that is something which is clearly essential, and I think you will find a large consensus, and those are the things that we can move faster towards derogations if we need that. For ski wax or for frying pans, I think it is clear that those uses are non-essential because there's neither something that is really critical for society that is at stake, and we have the necessary alternatives. So we are going to act fast here in going to ban those uses. And there are a lot of uses which are in between. For example, PFAS in semiconductors. Nobody can say that there are no alternatives, but also nobody can say that you can already replace today all uses of PFAS in semiconductors. So that is going to be the tricky area where essential uses can help, but we should not expect it to be the panacea who from one day to the other allows us everything to be clear.
Okay, thank you. Tatiana, in response to what Odo's laid out there, do you see this as a workable policy, or do you see too many political potholes along the way where you end up with a more complex process and becomes less efficient than is intended? How do you see this play out? Do you think it's viable?
Well, devil is in the details. Of course, the intention is actually to simplify and speed up decision-making process. And if it's applied properly, we still have to see what is the proposal by the Commission. We truly believe it will help to simplify and speed up regulatory decision-making. But of course, it depends on how it is applied.
Where do you think the good elements of this are? Where do you think the bottlenecks could be, Tatiana?
Well, I think the criteria proposed by the consultant is rather good in general. We strongly agree with the criteria that case by case is needed, to allowing all uses in the essential sector. We agree that the condition, it's not a free pass to polluters. So as Otto said, yes, maybe today we must consider a use essential, but it doesn't mean that it will be essential forever. So of course, the concept has to evolve and have to revise whether alternatives become available, and also to push companies not to feel like, okay, I'm done, I don't work on safer alternatives anymore, but invest on a substitution plan and overall minimize exposure to the extent of technically possible, because we are talking about the most harmful chemicals. So I think that's really important, and if applied well, can really help and protect, better protect people and the environment. Perhaps just to add that about this political decision making and so on, let's not forget who is currently taking these decisions. And these decisions on whether uses of very harmful chemicals, and harmful not just because they are hazardous, but also because exposure is there. This is industry who is currently taking these decisions, very regrettable decisions of using very harmful chemicals in childcare products, in cosmetics, in everyday products, that we as a society cannot accept. For example, that there are known chemicals that cause cancer in childcare articles. So, of course, there are more difficult cases, but at least for the clear-cut cases, as Otto said, there is no question. And it is the society who has to decide what is essential to us, not the companies marketing chemicals or using chemicals in everyday products.
Thank you. Marco wants to respond, and we're going to come to Martina. Marco.
Okay, thanks. I think that there was something mixed up, because basically we are saying what Tatiana said, free pass for polluters. So I don't see how the connection should be between essential use and polluting or non-polluting. These are two different discussions. I can have a non-essential use if I use it safely. If there is no exposure, I won't have any pollution. On the other hand, if I have an essential use, but I don't take care, I will pollute. So I think these are two different discussions. The essential use concept won't necessarily solve pollution. You will need something else, and that's risk management. And here we are coming from the point of view that if something can be used safely without exposure, with a proper risk management, that should be equivalent to the essential use.
Okay, thank you. This is what I wanted to lead on to with Martina, actually. Martina, so there's also a calibration to be had here as well. So, two things: whether something's an active substance, which has a higher risk, then simply dosage levels, you want to put it that way, the volume of a particular chemical which is in a product. as well. So if it's a high level, maybe you have higher risk, and if it's low level, you have lower risk. Do you think that the essential use concept will be able to moderate between these different levels, or do you think it's a blanket approach, which is the risk here? Martina?
Well, from what it's a new concept, and it's untried, yes. It's just now evolving. And what we did in the fragrance industry, we wanted to answer this question that you just raised, yeah. To what extent is the dosage important in this? And we commissioned a business impact assessment study with Ricardo, and the report, we asked them to do a qualitative assessment of the concept of essential use on the fragrance industry, and how is it going to impact us. And they had a couple key conclusions. One was, there's still a lack of clarity on the concept, and it's going to have more negative impacts on the sector. And the default position, unfortunately, is going to be that you will be deemed as non-essential, or your materials will be deemed as non-essential if they have hazardous properties. And then you have to prove essentiality. And here is what Marco said. The concept is very subjective. In our case, fragrances, they contribute to cultural and to cultural heritage. Yeah, fragrance have historic significance. They are ingrained in cultural traditions. And now there's new research that shows fragrances, they give a lot of benefits to people's well-being beyond their presence in consumer goods application. So this is called olfactory modulation of the mood. They help with stress, they help with anxiety, and more studies show if you have a positive scent, it increases to your well-being and your overall, feeling of clean and your general, well-being. So the question is, how is the Commission going to legislate on these cultural and intellectual aspects that are so important? And then the dose, just the last point on the dose. Yeah, it's absolute critical to us, because this is a concern that we have in the CSS and also in essential use, is that the dose is no longer considered. Yeah, everything is shifting. All the risk management is shifting from the likelihood of harm through the exposure to now the intrinsic properties of the molecules. And we think that's going to be very complicated for the future. We need other forms of risk management.
Thank you, Martina. Otto, lots to bounce off there. Let's start with dosage levels as well, and how subjective this could be. How do you see it?
Well, I think it's important to distinguish between the essential use concept and the restriction. The essential use concept is a tool to kind of take decisions on which uses we need to be more strict, and on which uses we need to see the societal advantages of the continued use of substances. This is without prejudice to doses. I think in restrictions, we will always work with doses, and also the existing application of the generic restrictions starts with doses. So everything that is there really in traces only is not necessarily concerned by bans. That's one thing. And Martina also mentioned the cultural aspects, which are also part of essentiality. So I don't exclude that those will play a role in the implementation also with respect to fragrances. But this is, of course, a discussion which still needs to take place, and which I cannot preempt at that stage.
Thank you. Although I wanted to talk about the economic aspect in terms of what could be essential as well, because the idea that you can technically replace something, but at what cost? So how will economics factor into this decision-making process as well? Like semiconductors is a fairly good example as well. If we had a global crisis with semiconductors, you could foresee that replacement materials could be used there, but again, you would increase the cost and slow production, and the value chain would just be completely disrupted. So how does economics play in terms of the proposed calculations? Otto.
Yeah, well, this is about the second criteria. This is about availability of alternatives. And in order to be an alternative, any alternative must be technically and economically feasible. Now, what does technically and economically feasible mean? It does not mean that the alternative must provide absolutely the same level of performance. And here also the criticality plays a role. So the two criteria interact. That means the more critical for society or necessary for health and safety a use is, the less will loss of performance be acceptable, and vice versa. That means if there are things that are not really very highly necessary for society, we also must accept that there may be a loss of performance of the alternative. So even if the frying pans are not exactly as good in anti-sticking, we still think that we need to change to the alternatives. Same thing on the economic feasibility. Of course, we cannot ask, for example, tooth fillings to be all replaced by gold. I think this will not work. But nevertheless, we can also not start with the assumption that the alternative is as economically advantageous as the original use, because otherwise, logically, the alternative would already be the winner on the market. So we must accept a certain level of price increase. Maybe there are job losses, but I think in all that, we shouldn't forget that every change also brings business opportunities. And I think that is very often forgotten in the discussion. So we're not only closing down productions, we're also building up new productions, and those are the productions of the future. And that can help us to bring innovation, and that can also help us to create competitiveness of European companies in the future.
Good. I was going to come to innovation just a second, so I'll bring Marco in for that in a moment. But I wanted to just to follow up on what you were talking about, the different criteria as well. Is it going to be like a scoreboard? Is there going to be an evaluation criteria where you have cultural elements is worth 10 points, the economics worth 10 points, the technical is worth 40 points, and so like a scale out of 100? How is this going to look in terms of evaluation? Because it doesn't seem to me that there's a level of consistency where business can look and say, look, we're okay on the technical side, but culturally we're a bit weak. Economically, we're fine today, but next year, mining is going to be a fraction of what it is today. Prices are going to go up. How are you going to calibrate in a way which is transparent and efficient for business to read? Otto.
Sorry, I didn't get. I thought this was to Marco. No,
Marco,
sorry. I think it's. I think we should give up the idea that on the on uses which are less clear. And can you hear me? I'm sorry.
Perfectly, it's fine.
I have the impression. Okay, fine. Sorry. We should give up the idea that the European Union and the Commission can decide everything, also on cases that are less clear, where the decision is really technical. So I think it's very important that we distinguish between the political level, where the Commission and the European Union needs to take its responsibility in taking decisions. Do we need a certain use or not? So that is not something that can be decided on the technical level. But when it comes to the alternatives, I think it is very important that we delegate this task to the experts, and that we rather deal with packages rather than having the idea that we will decide on each and every use separately.
Thank you. Marco, just come back to the innovation element that Otto mentioned as well. Is innovation likely to be enhanced as companies search out better alternatives, cheaper alternatives, safer alternatives? Clearly there will be some market disruption, but do you see this in a positive way or negative way?
I think it will depend on the case. So I think there are certainly more opportunities, but then you should also differentiate between, I'm coming now from the SME sector, I think that SMEs will have the hardest time. So you will need to kind of find also public money to subsidize those companies in the transition. I wouldn't see it black or white. However, when you look at the essential use concept as such, if it's not implemented in a way which gives legal stability, and right now we are with the chemical legislation in a very unstable situation where we talk about most hazardous chemicals and substances of concern, and we talk about substances of very high concern, and basically for now coming from the SME side, this is confusion, and this is not something that's supporting innovation. So I would say that the general discussion around the chemical strategy for the SME sector is rather going away from being supportive of innovation because of all those different political discussions that we are having. And one of them is the essential use discussion. So I wouldn't say that essential use per se will foster the development of better chemicals. It will just, from our point of view, create additional administration in many cases, which then will bind additional resources, which could be used in innovation, but they can't because they have to be there to investigate in supply chains, to talk to authorities, to read documents. So, for example, we are talking about the PFAS restriction recently, which has, I think, 1,500 pages, where you have to navigate through to find your uses, then you have to talk to your supply chains. We are trying to, now the PFAS example is a very good one, to find out how the supply chains are interwoven. And this is the reality for SMEs in practice. And that's so far very, very, very difficult. And I think we can improve here, but I'm not sure yet how. And certainly SMEs will need support.
Okay,
and that means also simplification in legislation and simply funds.
We're going to take some questions now. You mentioned PFAS. We have a question from Gary on this as well. Mark, I'll go to you first. How do you think this concept may apply to the proposal for restriction on PFAS?
I think knowing the process, that actually the essential use concept should be in the PFAS restriction and is not. It's going to be very hard for me to answer that, but I think it's going to be a bit confusing.
Okay.
Because that's it. I mean, we are now having uses, for example, for, I take one example, F-gases. F-gases are in the scope of the PFAS restriction. At the same time, we have some exemptions. At the same time, we are negotiating a new F-gas regulation in the ordinary legislative procedure. And if you look at the PFAS restriction now, this is contradicting to a certain extent the F-gas regulation. It simply doesn't make sense from the from an administrative saving concept. So you're regulating double. That costs resources and F-gases, SMEs again.
Let's put this back to Otto. Gary's question, how do you think this concept may apply to the proposal for restriction on PFAS and in the context of what Marco just said?
Mm-hmm. Well, the PFAS restriction is being elaborated under the current REACH rules, which do not explicitly refer to essential uses, but there is the possibility, of course, for derogations, which may de facto be based on essential use considerations. And I think that's what's actually happening. And that's why the dossier submitters are giving longer transition periods to things that we would consider as critical for society, while they're giving short periods for those things that are less critical in the end, and where alternatives are available. So yeah, but I think we also need to take into account the time, because I think the restriction will take time, and who knows, maybe the revised REACH regulation will already be in place when decisions are going to be taken on the PFAS restriction.
Thank you, Otto. Okay, let's go to Tatiana. And question from Claudia. And Claudia asks, how would a lack of knowledge of environmental impacts be dealt with under the essential use concept? Tatiana, what do you think?
Well, it is definitely a general lack of knowledge on impacts, but at the same time, we have enough. We have enough information to take action. The EU-wide human biomonitoring project has found alarming levels of very harmful chemicals in our bodies. We have found 17,000 hotspots of PFAS across the EU countries. In terms of human exposure, 100 times higher levels than the guidance values. So I would say we know enough to take action.
Thank you. Okay, Martina, I'm going to a question from Arthur Vandenberg. It's related to the same kind of element you're talking about later. So Arthur says, in complex objects, substances are not used only for their technical function, but also for the level of performance or a combination of functions. And I think fragrance goes to this element as well. How the essential use concept will how will the essential use concept take into account the level of performance and the combination of properties for the assessment of alternatives? What do you see in so far? Are you content more or less with the essential use concept in terms of level of performance, or is this still too ambiguous and the level of performance is not well understood yet? Martina.
Yeah, so the fragrance industry is a highly innovative industry. We spend 8% of our turnover on research and development, which is a lot. And so then you look at the question, is the essential use concept innovation stifling, or is it innovation enhancing? And we have this business impact assessment report done, which actually can be downloaded on our website, ifrafragrance.org. And in there, it gives the data on our industry. And, for us, we're going to be losing likely 11% of the workforce. And, to the assessment of alternatives and performance, sometimes there are no alternatives aren't readily available. So for us, it means if we would have an ingredient in a formulation that would need to be substituted, then often you need to see fragrances as a combination of science and art. And not always can you substitute specifically also with the naturals. Naturals, what is the alternatives to naturals? So, and they are complex mixtures, natural complex substances, and it's very difficult to engineer out a part that is not intentionally added to these substances. So, performance of alternatives is difficult, although it is, in the context of innovation, it's happening all the time. I mean, companies innovate and they are bio-inspired by the natural world, and then they look at what they can take, from there, and what can you learn, get the recipe from nature, scale it up, and then produce it, because the consumer wants these products, and for them, fragrances is the differentiator. The scent is actually a preference driver for consumers.
Let's build off that a little bit with another question. Otto, you take this one. So Veronique says, how about a company like Alessi, who make beautiful articles, often made of high-end stainless steel to display in the home? That is not essential, but many consumers want it. Will they have to do with lower-end materials which make these types of articles less sustainable? Otto.
I think the question that you're posing is not an easy one. First of all, I think we would definitely expect also products from Alessi to be without the most harmful chemicals. In certain cases, there may be a performance loss. I think that is certainly understood, and maybe also design loss. But I don't think that we are going to take this to the extreme. So I think you will see Alessi still in future as well.
Imagine the abolition of Alessi and the European Commission would go down too well. You don't want to go to extremes of this, but how do we gauge where we are on that? And we'll come back to this similar type of question I asked earlier. How do we gauge where these criteria fall? Are we going to have a sliding scale? What's the approach that's going to be taken, which will be well understood by industry, Otto?
Well, I think, as I said, I think essential use is mainly to help the clear cases. I think on the less clear cases, I think the essential use can help to a certain degree, but it's other things that will play on those. I think we need to learn that we shouldn't get lost in details. And when Marco said that SMEs need help and guidance to find solutions, well, yes, I absolutely agree that this is important, but we shouldn't expect the Commission to tell SMEs on each technological issue about what they can do or what they can't do. I think where we really need to find the solution for the complex cases is in the cooperation between companies. And I think big companies and alternative providers can help SMEs much more than we could do or that ECHA could do. So I think it is triggering that cooperation that will help finding the solution, getting the innovation, and also getting the predictability that is needed for that process to happen.
Okay, I want to come to Marco in just a second, but just to finish on this, while we're on Alessi, is this a good example of where there could be an issue with the component that's used in the manufacture of the product, but that the state matters, so that it's a stable state or an active state? Is this how is this evaluated in the proposal as well? Are we? And we talked about dosage earlier. It's a similar kind of thing. One product in one state is not necessarily going to impact the consumer in a different format. Otto.
Sorry, I missed the question. Can you please repeat?
Sure. So just if you take a product like Alessi, just this high finish stainless steel, the safety component of this in terms of risk management, it will vary a product will vary depending on the actual physical state of the component. So if it's a finished product, does it provide a level of risk to the consumer, which is the same as an unstable component, which is going to be an ingredient in the final process. So how does the proposal for essential use measure this? Like raw ingredients, core ingredients, and the finished product, they're not necessarily the same thing in terms of risk to the consumer.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether I fully grasp the issue. I think everything that has to do with the safety of a product, that is something where the safety has priority. An example I like to quote is the safety of roller coasters. So that is something that has no compromise. We're also not going to discuss whether roller coasters are necessary or not. I think loss of performance is no issue. But when it comes to design, and even if it is Alessi, and there is a substance in there that we think is not desirable for society as a whole, then I think also Alessi will need to make a number of compromises. But probably we can only discuss the reality if we really see the case.
I'm quite happy for you to ban roller coasters. If you want to do that, just go ahead. It's fine. Marco, let's go back to you. You wanted to follow up on an earlier question as well?
Yeah, thanks. It was the question that was asked to Tatiana. So I think that was the lack of impacts. If there is data lack of on the impacts and how the essential use could contribute there. And I think if you really apply the essential use, that should be seen independently. Because if I have lack of data, I shouldn't be on the market because of other reasons. And if I have the best data set for a substance and it's not considered essential and it's the most harmful chemical, then I should be prohibited according to the essential use concept. And I think that shows the complexity of that whole discussion, that only the essential use, having only the essential use as a main criteria is going to be problematic. And this is exactly where we are coming from, also saying we also need a safe use. So if something can be used safely, if there is a most hazardous chemical in an article, so for example, I'm thinking about discussions we had around crystal glass. Crystal glass has very often lead, but there is no exposure. So basically, this is even exempted from the REACH registration. Or when we think about, I'm going now to the ROS directive, we have organ pipes. So for music, there is lead inside. This is also used by consumers. We have lead, and there is no doubt this is a reprotoxic substance. That I wouldn't lick on that. However, playing an organ, I'm not worried about that. And here I'm coming now to the SMEs and going back to the essential use study, where it's going to be very problematic. What we've seen in the study, that basically in the ROS, we actually have experiences how long such derogation processes take. And this is, if I remember right, Otto, please correct me, it's at least 1 year going up to 1.5 to 2 years. Such a process to identify, to assess an exemption, a derogation from the ROS directive. At the same time, what also is clearly said in the study, that the participation from SMEs is factually zero. However, we have more than 99% of the companies in the EU which are SMEs. So we indeed have a data gap there. We have an awareness gap. We have a problem. So we need to, and I'm not only talking about funds or that the Commission goes and helps SMEs. I'm talking about developing a system that somehow gets SMEs in. I know that we have to do as SME United that as well, and we're working on that. But on the other hand, we also need more simplification in the legislation. We need to find a way how to get them in.
Okay, we'll come back to simplification in a moment. Tatiana, you wanted to reply also. Go ahead.
Yes, there were several comments about consumers wanting products even containing most harmful chemicals. I think the main reason why there may be a perception that consumers want products is because they don't know that these products contain the most harmful chemicals. I tell you that if I knew as a parent that a pacifier contain endocrine disruptors, I wouldn't want it. And what is true is that consumers want safe products, and we want 100% of certainty that products are safe. And this is something that companies cannot provide, this certainty. And that's why we fully embrace the precautionary principle and the generic approach. And there are an endless list of examples where industry considered that products were safe and then they were found not to be that safe. You just need to look at the restrictions list where the EU authorities and the scientists have agreed that we were at risk. A very good example is the issue of bisphenol A, that was considered as safe in food contact materials for many years, and suddenly the European Food Agency reduces the safe limit by 20,000 times, which means that we were all at risk actually for a very long time. So the safety also changes as science evolves and knowledge evolves, and this is something extremely important. And finally, regarding the essential use concept, how it's going to destroy businesses and so on. I think it's extremely important for me, the essential use is really applying common sense. And it's the common sense that has not been applied in the past. So it provides guidance to these companies that didn't apply. I used to work in trade unions, and we were working with companies to replace the most harmful chemicals in industrial processes. And we always invited companies to ask very basic questions on whether do you really need this very toxic chemical, and is there any other way to go on with your industrial processes without it? So these are very basic questions that have not been properly replied by companies in the past. So we need them to reply these questions before they put these chemicals in the market and allowing people to use them.
Thank you. Marco, you want to reply?
I would like to quickly reply that basically this is also a very important issue for us. I mean, it's not just about consumer protection, it's worker protection. And this, most of our members are workers, are users of chemicals, are not registrants of chemicals. And I would like to point out also something which I think scientifically is not correct, what you said, Tatiana, that 100% safety. We want 100% safe products, because at the same time you said that safety changes when science evolves. And this is where I'm with you. With 100% safety, I can't be with you. We always will have a risk. Or at least we will never be able to prove scientifically that something is not there. But what I said at my initial statement, that risk management is evolving, and this is very important, that we as industry take the responsibility to evolve in the sense of risk management. But I will never commit to 100% safety, because this is impossible.
Okay, I want to bring us to Otto. Otto, it's an important point, isn't it? Is that the permanence of a decision, whether positive or negative, simply won't exist. There is a flexibility to be had within the essential use concept, where the process, as knowledge increases, the decision can change. You can receive a derogation, or you can have a derogation removed accordingly. Otto.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I think what we need is to have clear pathways, substitution pathways, which allow industry to adjust, to move to alternatives. I've been visiting a paints company recently, and I think that clearly showed that they have been making a lot of business from replacing substances in the past, like the solvent-based paints, and they are now making a lot of business with the alternative. And the important thing is just that we design this transition phase from the current products to future products in a way that industry has predictability. They can cooperate, and I think that helps SMEs actually most, to get the cooperation from other companies, to get ideas from other companies, to make new business by grasping the opportunities that transition phase brings. What doesn't help is just to come with a very quick ban that leaves companies without solutions. And at the same time, we should also not defer those bans, because that will mean that those who have brilliant ideas, they can't make business with that idea, because the clients tend to be conservative and rather buy the things that they know they work. So here it's about finding the right balance, and it's also about being creative, about getting more cooperation between the companies going.
Thank you. Martina.
Yes, just to add on this debate, it's important that clear pathways are there, transition pathways are there, and these need to be done in collaboration with the business and cannot be 100% prescriptive. And someone said, 100% safety and zero risk, they are mathematically impossible. But what is important in this is that safety comes first, and that, whatever we do has the right science and is science-based, and scientific integrity really should underpin, continue to underpin all our policy making in the future. And, we discussed many times this hazard versus risk debate, and if the dose and the exposure are, should be left aside, because in the spirit of simplicity. But when you look and when you project that, we're losing a little bit this concept of Paracelsus, that says everything is a poison or a remedy. The dose just makes the difference. So as we go forward, it would be great that we maintain the science-based, and really the science should be the first decisive factor before the political elements.
I want to bring in Tatiana in just a second, but I have a question for you first, Martina. Bernd asks, is the essential use concept only being advanced in order to dispense concrete assessments under the guise of simplification? Martina. Is the essential use concept only being used to dispense concrete assessments pretending to be simplification?
That's a question for probably the Commission.
Okay, we'll bring that back in a moment then.
I would say,
Tatiana,
go ahead. Let me say what we see. We've done this impact assessment. Yeah, Ricardo has done this impact assessment on the qualitative assessment of essential use on the fragrance industry, and for them it's it's all the justification for the legitimacy of the concept is that it simplifies things, and it provides more guidance, but the reality of it is it complicates things in other areas. It may simplify in one area, but everything is interconnected these days. So what looks like a simplification up front has knock-on effects and spillover effects on another area downstream. So you need to look at it holistically in order to really assess, whether introducing this concept would simplify. Our view is it's very, very complex, and it's very difficult to manage going forward.
Point well made. We have a bunch of questions for Otto in just a second, but Tatiana first, you wanted to reply.
Yes, I wanted to appeal also to the responsibility of some companies, because we are saying, it's not possible to ensure 100% safety and so on. I mean, there is a way to be close to that, which is not using very hazardous chemicals. And bisphenol A was designed to be an hormonal disruptor. So industry knows since the design phase that it could alter hormones system. So they knew it was toxic. When EFSA came out with this reduction of safety levels or daily tolerance intake, it wasn't a surprise. We all knew since decades that bisphenol A was a very problematic chemical. Same with PFAS. PFAS was known by industry and scientists since the 1960s that it was a very problematic chemical, and this didn't stop many companies to adding PFAS to frying pans, dental floss, and so on. Even the ancient Greeks knew that lead was poisonous and was neurotoxicant, and still it didn't stop companies to add lead in paints, in ammunition, and you name it, even in jewelry. So, of course, by saying, don't worry, we have everything under control, we cannot trust this anymore. That's why we need a generic approach to really don't allow these chemicals anymore in everyday products, and then we will not have regrettable surprises in the future.
I've always found it amusing that people worried about lead in ammunition. Is that if that lead's coming into contact with you, the least of your concern is poisoning. So, Otto, we have a bunch of questions. We'll try and give quick answers to these as best you can. One from Malik. We now have a study on the essential use concept. One of the key questions remains, in which regulatory framework will this concept be used and how? We've heard of a potential Commission communication on the EUC. How will it be used in REACH, for instance? Thank you, Malik.
Yeah,
Otto,
well, I think it will be used in REACH. That's definite, and I think we are going to use it as the criterion for any generic restrictions. For the specific restrictions and for authorizations, we are also using it as a supporting criteria to the existing criteria. What concerns other pieces of legislation, it's more difficult for me to say where we will end up. We're still having discussion on certain pieces of legislation. We're having other pieces of legislation like biocides, which have been using essentiality for a long time as a criterion. So also there you find essentiality as a criterion. We're also working on a communication on the concept, which should also provide further clarification. It's in the last stages. I can't really say when it will come out, whether it's before summer or probably rather after summer.
Okay, thank you. You nailed it for another question from another Tatiana who asked exactly that. So let's go to another question. This one's for Otto or Marco. Marco, you take this first. Medicine, it's from Pierre Sultana. Medicines are clearly essential, as the European Medicines Agency is responsible for those products. Could the fact that medicines must be evaluated by the EMA be used as a way to exclude medicines from REACH and avoid ECHA ruling under the EMA? It's from Pierre, he's with Animal Health Europe. So who's responsible, I think, is the essence of this as well. Marco?
No, I can just go back to the study of the essential uses, and actually the essential use study is saying severe health conditions. So I think that there are two categories of meds, the one for severe and the one for non-severe health conditions. So if this has a purpose, this criteria in an essential use study, we will have a differentiation here. For me, it doesn't make sense, and I hope we're going to be very pragmatic here.
Anything to add there?
Well, the final medicinal products are not subject to REACH. So this is medical legislation which has different context, but there are, of course, products which end up in medical products in the end. So those are subject to REACH, but certainly essentiality will play a role in there, which doesn't mean that there are no cases where we might have alternatives that work as well. And in those cases, I could still imagine that we're ending up in requiring change.
Okay, we may have covered this a little bit. The question is, who will decide on essentiality? Who will decide what's an acceptable loss of performance or culturally relevant use? Otto, quick answer on that?
I can't give you an answer on that. This is a key question. It's probably the most important question, and that still keeps us busy. We are still deciding on the governance.
Okay, thank you. From Claudia, does the essential use concept take into account the entire life cycle? Tatiana, maybe you want to have a go at this. Does the essential use concept take into account the entire life cycle, i.e. beyond the use phase, to enable safe recirculation of materials or safe disposal?
Well, I guess that's my view, what it is asked there, rather than the knowledge on what it will be considered, because I don't know. But I think the generic approach goes beyond that. The generic approach tries to avoid this lengthy and costly and burdensome process of proving the exposure of chemicals along the whole life cycle, but assuming that very toxic chemical in everyday products may have an exposure at any time in the life cycle, from manufacture to use to waste disposal. So, and that's a fact. I mean, chemicals don't disappear. They just move from one place to the other in the environment. So at the end of the day, exposure, it's always there and cannot be guaranteed. The contrary.
Okay, Thank you. And so we have a question, Otto, maybe this is for you. You mentioned, it's from Daniela, you mentioned hydrogen. Will you consider all renewables essential use as they are key for reaching the twin transitions? That's an interesting question. If you get extra points for having a renewable toxic product rather than a non-renewable toxic product?
Well, I think here it's a double question. That means what are the risks that are related to those uses? And here we're talking about industrial uses. We're not talking about consumer products. So the risks are an important decision-making element. And the second question is how critical the use is. And I think even for the most critical use, if we have suitable alternatives, of course, we want them eventually to be implemented. But in the time to market maturity of the alternatives, we will be, of course, be much more tolerant for such uses where there is a need to use the substance in the meantime. So if we need investment security for a plant that allows us the transition to happen 5 years earlier, well, I think we will take that into account. And investment security also means that you can continue marketing the substance sometime that allows kind of amortization of the investment, even if in the meantime an alternative becomes available. But that doesn't mean that this derogation will be there forever. Eventually, we want also to have hydrogen production, for example, to be as environmentally friendly as we can.
Okay, thank you. Martina, from what we've heard during this discussion, is your impression more positive or more negative from this discussion in terms of your industry, fragrance industry as well? And do you have a sense that the political, technical and cultural elements are going to be addressed well by this new change to the regulation?
From our industry's perspective, we do need to differentiate the two levels. One is the higher level debate of how what's said in the CSS, that this concept will be applied to across policy areas. And somebody mentioned the medical field or pharmaceutical, which are essential. So we have two challenges. The first is the wider debate and how this concept will actually be translated into law across policy areas. I think a lot more dialogue, a lot more discussion need to take place to understand the concept better and to define it in a better way. And that needs to happen, this dialogue needs to happen across policy areas. Now here we talk in the narrower concept of REACH, and Otto just said essentiality will be featured in REACH and in the REACH revision. So here it's in one policy area and it's seen in a much narrower context. And here from our industry's perspective, we would like to see this recognition of the cultural heritage and the cultural factors that are very important in this, and we would like to work with the Commission and policymakers to get the criteria in a good way for all the stakeholders.
Okay, a quick comment on this from Marco and Tatiana, then we're going to go to our wrap-up from everyone as well. Marco, same kind of approach, too much ideology, too much politics, not enough technical side. How do you see this after this conversation?
I think it's very political. The whole essential use concept is very political. And I don't believe this is going to make chemical legislation, chemical regulation simpler. And I don't believe that, for example, also because Otto mentioned something where the Commission is also taking its inspiration from, and that's the biocidal product regulation. The biocidal product regulation is a very good example of how you can overpack processes. So basically, in that regulation, we are not able to stick to any of the important deadlines. So what is happening there? We have postponed the most important deadline, the evaluation of the active substances, for 10 years until 24. We're discussing now to postpone it again. And that shows it's not working in such detail. It shouldn't be micromanagement. And I think essential use can drift into micromanagement. And that's the trap.
We're tight on time. Just quick comment on this from Tatiana, and then we're going to wrap up. Tatiana, ideology too embedded here? Too much politics?
Well, I don't think it's a ideological or a philosophical issue. It's purely a political issue. Well, I wouldn't say purely, but there are these two parts of technical and political decision making. But this is not that different from the current situation. For restrictions, we have a technical scientific part that informs the decision makers to take a political decision. And this is the same that is going to be applied. I don't see that it would be that different. And if applied well, I think it can improve the system, which has been proven to be slow and ineffective to regulate chemicals.
Thank you, Tatiana. 30-second wrap up from everybody. Let's start with Marco. Your key takeaway for today.
It's going to become interesting. And I think that when we look at the worker protection legislation, we are setting occupational exposure limits with the parliament, with the council. When we discuss under REACH essentiality, we are doing that with a simplified legislative procedure comitology. That doesn't, there is a bit, it's a bit out of balance.
Okay.
I think we're going very far with the essentiality discussions.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Martina, 30 seconds.
Yes, what I said in the beginning, the concept is very complex, highly complex, and it's not mature yet enough to legislate across policy areas. So we have three principles that need to also work here. Precautionary principle was mentioned, dominates the debate, but proportionality principle I would like to see that evaluated a little bit more. And then the innovation principle, and how all of these feature together in better regulation. Because the interinstitutional agreement, the better regulation, we didn't even touch upon. It's there, the tools are there, but they could be used better to achieve a better outcome for everybody.
Thank you, Martina. Tatiana, 30 seconds.
Yeah, we see the essential use concept not only as a regulatory tool, but also as an important guidance for companies on which uses are not acceptable to society. These uses have no future and imply a risky business, as investors has already shown. So for us, it's not a threat, but an opportunity for green innovation by preventing regrettable uses of the most harmful chemicals. So it is future-proof innovation that would place the EU industry in a global leader position, not business as usual.
Thank you. Otto, 30 seconds, last word.
Well, in looking at how the Montreal Protocol dealt with essential use, I have to conclude that they have done a pretty good job in defining the criteria. But of course, everything depends on how it is actually implemented. The big challenge for us is to get things done in the best way possible. And the two are sometimes a bit contradictory. Of course, you can do a very thorough analysis and you will be able to further improve the analysis and the decision making, but you will not get things done. So the challenge for us is to combine the two in the best way possible. And here we need to be creative to find a combination which is not just a bit left or right, but which is better. And that is really in identifying better what's for us. And I think here the criticality and necessity can help. What is not for us, the technical analysis, their essential use concept will not help. We need to have other mechanisms to get people going and to find proper solutions that can help all of us.
Thank you so much. Thanks to Nickel Institute for their support for the program today. To our studio team, Bonia, Zoran and Malta, and to our events team led for this program by Shifra. We appreciate all the hard work. You don't see them, but I'm looking straight at them right beside me. And I wish you a good day. If you're still interested in the environment, we have another program on this afternoon on circular economy. You can go to the events website and probably still register for that, but join us online for that. And I wish you a good day. Take care. I'm Brian McGuire.